So we are set to resume with part 3, and I figured out my CSS problem, why my padding didn't work, because I had this in my style sheet. I had field set, never bothered to pay attention that we actually gave a class of form group to the field sets in register and login. So if I change my field set definition to dash form group, this overrides the Bootstrap form group class, and voila, now I have padding. So in my CSS, where before I had field set on line 10, I changed that to dot form group, and now we have padding. Okay, so there were a couple really good questions just before we took a break. So Megan asked, aren't we going to have an issue if we enter the same user again? The password, no, because the password hash algorithm, it includes behind the scenes a salt value, which makes sure that every password is unique, even if two users enter the same plain text value. But yes, we should be checking before we save. We should be checking that we don't already have a user. So we're going to add that. And Chris, so how will we verify their identity? Now, normally in most sites, what we could do is we could send an email to that. But because we've got limited mail server access on AWS, we're not going to be able to do that. So in this case, we're not going to be verifying identity. But in a production web server, yes, we could status an account as pending. So we could add in our user table, for example, we could add an active field. By default, when a user signs up, we set that field to false. And only after they click a link through an email do we toggle that active link from false to true, and we don't let them log in unless their account is active. So that would be one way of doing it. Is that answering your question, Chris? Okay. Right, so the user, I enter password test1234, how is it going to be the same? PHP has a function for this called, conveniently enough, password verify. It verifies that a password matches a hash. So again, we put in the plain text password, and it returns the algorithm cost and salt. So, which is all information that's needed. Okay, so we're going to rely on the password verify method to do this for us. How exactly it all works under the hood is a bit too complex for me, but it can look up the proper password hash. So we're going to rely on password verify. Great question. Okay, so we should modify our save registration page before we do this stuff. So I'm going to indent all of our code that saves, because we're going to wrap this in an if statement, right? First, we're going to check that the username doesn't already exist. And if it does, we're going to show the user an error. So after we check username doesn't already exist, so in this case, we can just select maybe the user ID from users. We'll set up our command. We'll fill our username parameter. So I can actually just copy this from down below. It's identical. We'll execute the command. And we'll say user equals cmd fetch. So we're just going to select a single user. And then we'll say, if we have a user, if this query finds somebody, well, then we can't save this person. We've already got this username. So if we've got a user, we'll just say echo user already exists. We'll make it a little red warning sign. And then we'll just call exit. So this will stop the rest of this execution. Actually, I guess we still want to disconnect. I'll put this in paste bin. Okay, so if we find a user, we're going to print a message that says the user already exists. We're going to disconnect, and we'll just stop execution. The other thing I want to do on this page is add the header and footer. So it's got our navigation, it's got our footer, and it's got our CSS links. So this code is going to go right underneath our include. I'll put it on paste bin. Here's the link if you need it. And I'm just going to include now header at the top and footer at the bottom. So I'm going to go up to the top. I'm going to get rid of everything here. So we'll start with our PHP tag. I'll include the header at the top. And then down at the bottom, I will remove the closing body, closing HTML tags, and substitute those by including our footer. So set your page title right at the top. Include your header. We can remove all of the HTML template that was at the top. I'll come down to the bottom. I'll remove those two tags at the bottom. And we'll just include the footer. I can put the whole page up on paste bin if that helps. So same page, but it now includes header and footer. Pardon me. So I'm going to try to register with a username that already exists. So I'll go back and I'll try my user at gc.ca. It remembers the password. So now when I try to register, I should get a message in red telling me my user already exists. We'll try it. We may have to tweak it a bit. Okay, I said exit so my footer doesn't load. That's okay for now. So now I'll go and put in, rich at gc.ca. Again, I'll use the same password. Oh, didn't put in the right password twice. So now it says registration saved. Lets me go to the login page. So now when I check, I've got 3 users. Again, unique hash value for each one. So Megan, thank you for pointing that out. That's definitely something that we should add, this duplicate check. And there's a few other ways we could write the query. We could use a count function and then just evaluate if it returns 1 or 0. I guess maybe instead of an exit, I probably should just use an else so that my footer shows up. So maybe what I'll do here is take this out for efficiency, and we'll just say else. And then I'll disconnect down below no matter what. And my confirmation has to go inside the else. I think that's better. So if we save a user, show registration saved. Otherwise, we're showing our alert. And we're going to disconnect either way. I think that makes more sense. I'll update pastebin with this version. So here's the new link, the completed version. That includes our duplicate check, where we're either showing an alert that the user exists, or we're saving the new user and showing a confirmation message. We disconnect either way. Now I quickly just need to add the foods table because I'm working with a new database today. I've just got to go back to our lesson 2. I need to build my table. So I'm going to grab my items table and just run that. You won't need to do this so long as you're accessing the database. So I don't have any food here. Why do I still have an error? Bear with me for a sec, folks. Oh, because I don't have a categories table either. Fortunately, I have all this stuff on D2L. So just give me a second to catch up to you. Okay, so now I should be able to go to category details and add some categories. So let's see, we got pantry. Oh, it's not using my database. Okay, I'll just insert a couple categories here. Okay, so I'll just insert these categories. All right, now my site should work. Okay, so now I can go and add an item. I would hope. What's with my, oh. I will just replace this with my include. So now it'll point to my local database. So just bear with me. I'm just catching up so I can get this to work with my local site. Okay, great. So salmon, one piece of salmon from seafood. Let's figure out why that's not there. Coffee. I need a tin of coffee from the pantry. Okay. I will come back and figure it out. Didn't get an error, but didn't save. Interesting. I'll just insert an item in here for now. Okay, so I've got something here. So now we've got our login page. So now we want to validate the login. And then the last thing we can do is check that when I'm not logged in, I shouldn't see the edit and delete links. I should only be able to see these once I log in. So we've got one more page to create, and then we'll have to make some changes to our items, and then we'll pause for today and we'll come back and do more next week. So if we look at our login page, it's going to post to a page called validate.php. We have to build this file. This is basically going to be like a hidden page, because either it's going to validate the user, and if it does, we're going to redirect them over here. And if the login is invalid, we want to reload this page and show them an error message telling them their login is invalid. So validate is going to be a hidden page. So PHP Storm, it actually says, it's highlighting this in yellow for me, and it says, can't find this file, do you want to create one? So I'll just click on this. Yes. And it creates validate.php for me. If you're in Visual Studio Code, you may not have that option, so you can just create validate.php manually. Actually, you know what? This will be the last page we'll do today. We'll do the security check on items.php next week. We've done a lot already today. I'm going to delete everything here and just put on a set of PHP tags, because this is a hidden page. hidden page, so no header footer needed. So we want to get login inputs. We want to connect. And then we want to validate what's happening here. Set up query. If user found, check password. If password valid. Store user in session and redirect to items list. If invalid, reload login page with error. So most of the code we need here is stuff we already know how to do. But here are all the steps. There's going to be only a couple of new things on here. I think there'll be 3 lines we haven't used before. Getting the login inputs, well, that's going to be simple. We're just going to use the post collection. Right, so username will come from our form post. So will the password. Right. Pretty simple, nothing new. Use the post collection to read the 2 form inputs and store them in variables. Connect, we've made as simple and as short as possible. Use our include file. Now, because the password is hashed, the way that it works is first we want to look for the username. If we find the username, we're then going to do a password check. So we'll kind of have 2 checks on here. So first, our query is simply going to be select star from users where username so we're not sending in the password directly. We'll prepare our command and we'll execute it as normal. I missed a semicolon, which WebStorm nicely points out with a little red squiggly line. So absolutely nothing new here. Grab the form inputs, connect to the database, set up a query, execute it. And we'll call fetch because we're getting a single record. Now, if this username doesn't exist, we don't care about the password. We don't have to bother hashing it. If the username isn't in the database, the login is invalid. So we'll say if there is no user, we'll use header location to go back to the login page, and we'll pass in a parameter of invalid so we can show a message at the top of the login page that says, we can use an alert danger to show invalid login. Actually, in this case, we probably want to disconnect first. So otherwise, no, it doesn't disconnect from the database, Chris. The database connection is separate. So it'll leave that connection open potentially until it times out. So best to manually disconnect it. So if we do have a user, then we want to use this password verify method. So we want to call password verify. So we're going to pass in our password variable. And again, whoops, sorry. Yep, so there's our password. And our user. So this is our hashed value, and this is the plain text value. So we're going to compare the hashed password in the DB with the hashed version of the password entered. So if they're the same, yes, Megan, we do. Thank you. Great catch. Before we execute, much appreciated. Awesome debugging. This will not work, right? We'll get an error. Number of tokens and number of variables don't match. Right, so we want to bind the parameter to fill our username in the query. Thank you. Almost done, folks, I promise. So if they are equal, if this returns true, we need to do one weird thing first. We want to store their identity in the session. Back to my goofy diagram. But before we can read or write variables to a session, we have to connect to the existing session. So we have to call session_start, which is goofy. Other web scripting languages don't make you do this. We automatically have access to the session object, not in PHP, drives me nuts. Now we'll store the username in a session variable for persistence. So now we can use the session object So we're going to store the user's email address in the session. Then, for example, next week we can print it out in the header. So no matter what page they're on, when someone's logged in, we can show their email address in the header. And then we want to redirect to items list. So we'll use header location to go to items.php. Thank you. Yep. Nice catch, Quinlan. Yeah, and I should pay attention to the color coding in my editor. This is yellow because it thinks it's a constant. I will post all this code in a minute, but Megan, Quinlan, awesome debugging. Thank you. So here, actually, we can disconnect even here before we redirect. And if the passwords don't match, we'll actually move this up here. If the passwords don't match, again, we want to disconnect and go back to the login screen. So this same redirection, header location, back to login. So I'll just copy that. So in this, so we've got three scenarios. The username doesn't exist, disconnect and reload login. The username does exist, and the hashed password can be found. We're going to connect to the session, store them, disconnect, and then go to the items page. And then lastly, if the username is found, but the password doesn't match, so I'm going to try all three of these scenarios, and we'll stop for today. So I'm going to save that code. I'll put it all up on Pastebin so we can all try it. We'll have more to do next week, but at least we can check our three login scenarios. So I'm going to go to register. First, I'm going to put in an email address that I know doesn't exist. Actually, sorry, I'll do it through my login page. So I know this is not in my user table. If I look in my user table, I've got user, ABC, and Rich. Foobar I don't have. So in this case, it brings me back to login and it says invalid equals true. We haven't written any code to display a message on this page. We'll do that next week. At least it's taking me to the right place. If I put in rich at gc.ca, but I put in an invalid password, come back here. Again, it brings me back to login and it says invalid. So our two invalid scenarios are working. Username not found. Username is found, but wrong password. Both cases, I get reset to login. This time, if I put in a valid login, it should take me off to the grocery list, which it does. So those are our three possible scenarios. Username not found, username found, but wrong password, or username found with the correct password. Megan, the problem is we're redirecting. So if I put it outside, once I redirect, the disconnection doesn't happen. So it would get ignored if I did it that way. So I want to make sure I disconnect while I'm still on this page to free up that connection as quickly as possible. Okay, so we've set up our database infrastructure. We can register, we can log in. Everything on our site is still public though, right? I can still make any changes to it even without logging in. We have no ability to log out. Our header doesn't indicate if we're logged in or out. There's still some other things we need to clean up with this in terms of security. So I'm going to push everything up to GitHub for today. So you do have a quiz for next week, and please get started on assignment 2. It's due in a couple of weeks. Okay, I will stick around in the WebEx room for a little bit. Ivan, I'm also happy to answer your question because you said you had an off-topic question. So now would be the good time to ask it, and I'm happy to answer it. I'll post the recordings later today when they're done processing. Have an awesome week, everybody. Thanks. It was a lot of coding, a lot of work we did today. So, okay, that's great. Thanks for your help and your input and your debugging, and I will see you next week. If you're watching the lesson asynchronously, please make sure you contribute to the Miro board to get your contribution mark for this week. Okay, have an awesome week. I'll see you all next Tuesday.